Good morning. Mm, mm, Well, it's really 10:19, 10:19 Central Time, 11:19 East Coast. Shout out to the East Coast this morning. Gonna be in chapter 12 this morning of Brother William Grimshaw of Haworth, written by the amazing author Faith Cook. So I did grab Faith Cook's other book that I have been reading. So here is Selena, Countess of Huntington. This chick was savage to say the least. Got saved, a godly woman, but yet still wielded a lot of force. See that YouTube, Facebook. Selena, Countess of Huntington. During the 1700s, this chick once she came to faith, she was high up, prominence, money, stuff like that. She had a really dope estate, like real awesome place to live. And she looked out for these preachers, like these nonconformists and like these new Methodist guys. And when they would get arrested, she would show up. Like when they get arrested on some trumped up charges, she would come in there and just wield her weight around like, I'm sorry, what were they arrested for? And you took their stuff? Let me get all their stuff back and they're coming with me. She would just clown and boss the authorities. So it was great to have a real godly woman with a whole bunch of authority on your side. It reminds me of the time when I was chaplain at University of Maryland. Now, I created that position. I didn't go through the school for it wasn't like a school job. I created by starting Bible studies with the athletes, praying for the athletes, starting Bible studies with the athletes. So I became friends with the athletes, and really the athletes were the ones that say, "Hey, that's my guy," you know. So good morning, Brother West. So here's the other book by Faith Cook. So we've been going through this one on Faith Cook, William Grimshaw of Haworth, and then this was her other book. These are both 1700s period. So you got, Selena, Countess of Huntington. But she would always stick up for John Wesley, Charles Wesley, George Whitefield, any of these preachers that would get arrested by authorities. She would go and bail them out. She would always bail out the preachers. So remind me when I was at University of Maryland, I started doing Bible studies with Vasquez, and you're walking around the Comcast Center or whatever. When you're walking around and they try to stop me, Gravesby is like, nah, that's my guy. Come on through. That's all you needed. You just need someone high up in some authority position, and they get you right through. When I was working with Kevin Durant for that 1 year, you get stopped by security, and I said, but hey, Kevin, and then they'd be just like, go like this, and that's all you needed. All you needed was that somebody of authority just said, no, that's, he's with me. And so what a blessing it is to have people that are sympathetic to the faith and help out. So this book is awesome. You can get this at banneroftruth.org. An awesome book by Selena, Countess of Huntington. She's just an amazing godly woman that had a pivotal role in the revivals of the 18th century. There in the 1700s. She would bail all the preachers out of jail when they would get jailed on Trump charges. Okay. So that's a cool book by Faith Cook. Faith Cook, she's still alive. She lives in England. I haven't met her. I would like to meet her. After reading these books, I would really like to meet this lady. She just seems like an awesome human being, and I like the way she writes. Drinking some green tea that I brewed this morning. Brewed some green tea, and I put some agave nectar in there. Some organic agave nectar. So cheers. Cheers, friends. We're in chapter 12. Oh, good morning, Mother. Good to see you. I got Peggy and Peggy on. You got two Peggies. Miss Frances Wills. Good to see you. Brother West. Good to see you. I'm going to start up chapter 12 during this lunchtime hour for some of y'all. And so this chapter is called Not Counting the Cost. Not Counting the Cost. All right. Let me get some waves out there. Good to see you. Good to see you. Good to see you. Gotta hit these little wave buttons. So I'm gonna wave at everybody, let everybody know. Good to have you. And God bless you. All right, cool. There we go. not counting the cost. As William Grimshaw sat writing to John Wesley on August 20th, 1747, explaining how he had been delivered from his Nicodemical fear. Nicodemical fear. He's talking about like Nicodemus, how he was kind of scared of, who would see him. Remember, he came to Jesus in the nighttime. He kind of snuck out. He came to Jesus real late at night on the low, because he didn't want his religious boys to know, his Pharisees, his Pharisee boys to know he come and talk to Jesus on the low. So that's why he kind of coined that phrase. This guy William Grimshaw, Nicodemical fear of crossing parish's boundaries, because really by the Church of England at that time, I guess he was just supposed to stay in his county. He wasn't supposed to go to other counties. If I was preaching in PG County, I wasn't allowed to go to Moco. I wasn't allowed to go to Charles or Anne Arundel County. I had to stay in my county. But he kind of got past those weird rules of the Church of England at that time, saying you got to stay in your parish, stay in your county. So he started doing that. He did not mention explicitly that he too had already experienced a taste of that mindless persecution, which was so frequently the lot of these early Methodist preachers. He merely contented himself with stating that his excursions into neighboring parishes had proved, quote, a great offense to the clergy. So you had a bunch of preachers. What up, Brother Tim? What up, man? Shout out to you. Shout out to you. It says it was a great offense to clergy. So you got these other church like pastors and leaders that were hating, like, oh, what you doing on our turf, bro? What you doing on the turf? When it shouldn't be about, it ain't no turf war. We're preaching the gospel. Like, man, why are you so insecure? Like, chill out. Like, the man's preaching the gospel. Let the man preach. Anyways, A.C.H. Seymour, who had access to Benjamin Ingham's original journals and diary, describes in some detail in his life and times of the Countess of Huntingdon. There you go. There's my girl. Shout out. Selena. Here's a picture of her family in the back. Some old school. That's 1700s, baby. 1740s. God bless her. Said an early persecution in Colne, Colne, was one of those towns 9 miles west of Haworth, and in which Benjamin Ingham, Grimshaw, and William Batty were all involved. Although Seymour gives no date for this event, fortunately, William Batty, who had good reason to remember the details, records the same episode and also provides a date, July 7th, 1747. What up, Alfonso? What up? What up? Good to see you this morning. In chapter 12, it's called Not Counting the Cost. So that's a cool chapter title, Not Counting the Cost. In Grimshaw's letter to John Wesley, he mentions that it was 6 weeks prior to the time of writing that God dealt with him when he had almost decided to sally out no more. Sally out no more, where he's just like, I'm too scared to go across parish lines or county lines to preach the gospel. Let's see. Here's a little footnote. It says Seymour also wrote a 400-page biography of Ingham, which was unpublished. The manuscript, entitled Memoirs of the Life, Ministry, and Religious Connections of the late Benjamin Ingham, is kept in the Chestnut Foundation, Westminster College of Cambridge. Pretty cool. I'd like to see that. So it says, piecing together these two facts, we realize that it was only a day or two after Grimshaw's experiences at Colne that God renewed his faith and courage to venture out again, regardless of personal cost or suffering. Got to get that word out there, no matter if there's haters or not. In his description of the events of that day, Batty, who had now become Ingham's co-worker, sharing both his toils and his sufferings, begins by mentioning that on the way to the house in Colne where Ingham was due to preach, they noticed an ominous little gathering at the door of a tavern with a vicar of Colne, George White, in the center. No sooner had they begun the service and sung 3 verses of an opening hymn when, here you go, that vicar, he's kind of like the director of missions, but a mean one. He says, the vicar came furiously into the house with a great mob at his heels. He had a great staff in one hand and the constable at the other. He rushed through the peoples toward W.B. Batty as he intended to strike. But B. Ingham, who stood behind him, pulled him up by the coat, and they got into a room where they abode some time, and heard the vicar and constable threaten the master of the house with the stocks, although they had no warrant, yet they attempted to carry him forcibly away. Man, them haters came up. He's preaching in church. The vicar, like the head guy of the Church of England of that whole region, he's over there. He got the constable. They over at the pub waiting to see who's coming into church. They come in church, man starts preaching. They come in there with some billy clubs. Homeboy just jacked him up. His buddy pulled him up. Ingham pulled Batty up into this little room. They locked himself in this little room. And it says they said they was gonna get him with them stocks. It was about to hit him with them stuff, put him in some chains, right? Let's see, intended to strike, but B. Ingham, who stood behind him, pulled him up by the coat, and they got into a room where they abode some time, and heard the vicar and the constable threaten the master of the house with the stocks. He's gonna put him in stocks. He's gonna put him in the stocks. That reminds me when I was preaching at the Washington Parish Free Fair over there. You think they'd be cool with letting a preacher speak? Since we Washington Parish, now we churched out. We got 36 Southern Baptist churches. Who knows how many missionary Baptist churches? Who knows how many Pentecostal churches? We're all preaching Jesus and the gospel, right? This cop's like, you're gonna have to shut it down, or we're gonna arrest you. I'm gonna take you to jail. It's like, you're gonna take me to jail for preaching the gospel at a Washington Parish Free Fair? He's like, yes, I am. I said, well, that's cool. I was like, I'm the chaplain of the jail, so that'd be cool. Those are all my boys in there. I go preach to them every week. So yeah, I mean, you can take me over there if you want to. He's like, look, we just, blah 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 blah. We just can't have this done here. Blah 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 blah. So I mean, that's the only time I was threatened to get arrested for preaching. So I thought about it, but my flesh wanted to do it. My flesh wanted to get arrested just so I could just be like, I got arrested, or I was like, you know what? It's not what the Spirit wants me to do right now. The Spirit just wants me. I'd already preached like 3 or 4 messages, so I was kind of close to ending anyway. So it's just like, yeah, just let it slide. Let it go. But when you're in Washington Parish jail, all you need to get out is 2 10s and 2 5s. You gotta have exact change. You gotta have it like that. 2 10s, 2 5s get you out. Isn't that funny? I'm telling you, I'm out there. That was Podunk Town, man. I'm sorry, Washington Parish. That's country. I mean, y'all know y'all country. Y'all know 2 10s, 2 5s get you out of jail. Interesting times for preaching the gospel at the free fair. I was like, yeah, that's cool. I was like, bro, what church do you go to? He told me what church out there in Bogalusa. Oh, I was like, I know your pastor real well. Should I call him up? Yeah, man. You want me to call him up real quick and ask him how you've been doing? Make sure you tithing and you've been attending every Sunday. Oh man. Let me read this next thing. Taking up the narrative at this point, Seymour adds that when the householder demanded to know on what authority he was being threatened, the constable at last conceded that he had no warrant and let him go. Man, these fools ain't have no warrant. Can I see your warrant, please? He was like Denzel Washington with that rolled up Chinese food menu. Talking about, we got a warrant. We got a warrant. Girl was like, let me see that warrant. Let me see that warrant. And once they already searched the whole house, flipped the house, and stole a bunch of stuff, dirty cops, they handed a warrant. It was a Chinese food to go menu. So look, I know there's a bunch of good cops out there. Shout out to the good cops. But you bad cops, you better get your life right, guys. Coming with that Mike Tyson right hand fury. The judgment of God's coming down on dirty cops. So y'all want to get clean, do what you got to do. I mean, you're gonna stand before the judge, God judge, not some judge you can pay off here in Tangipahoa Parish and Washington Parish. We're talking about a judge you can't pay off. His name is God. He's gonna judge. He's gonna judge. So you trying to arrest a bunch of preachers with fake warrants, like you did like these cats did in the 1740s. You're gonna get judged. It says that last conceded that he had no warrant and let him go. By this time, the frightened congregation had dispersed. Oh man, the poor sheep, they scattered. The vicar and the constable then tried to insist that Ingham and Grimshaw should sign an undertaking that they would not preach in Cologne again. Come on, bro. Stopping the work of the gospel preaching, man. It's just like free. When it was understood that Mr. Grimshaw, Mr. Ingham, and Mr. Batty refused to comply with any terms, they were violently dragged along the road, the mob flourishing their clubs over their heads, menacing and annoying. They were pelted with mud and dirt, and Mr. Ingham's coat torn and hanging on the ground. Thus, they were conducted to the Swan Inn to remain there until dismissed at Mr. White's pleasure. This experience, unnerving in itself, was only a prelude of worse to come. The haters are coming, y'all. The haters are coming. But for a few months, and the chapter's called Not Counting the Cost, chapter 12, Not Counting the Cost. But for a few months, all appeared quiet. The local clergy, however angry at Grimshaw's popularity and his increasing incursions into their parishes, tried another method of curbing his activities. In May of 1747, Thomas Herring, who had been Archbishop of York since 1743, was promoted to the See of Canterbury. Herring was known to be a moderate and a friend of Methodism, provided it did not take too extreme a form. He had been well disposed towards Grimshaw, particularly after the latter proved himself Herring's loyal supporter in his stand against the young pretender during the Second Jacobite Rebellion. Yeah, you don't know about them Jacobite rebellions? You can look that up. 1745. This made it unlikely that Herring would impeach Grimshaw if any complaints were lodged against him. However, a change was at hand, for in November of 1747, the very period when Grimshaw's preaching tours began in earnest, Matthew Hutton was consecrated in York Minster. Now, Grimshaw's opponents had the opportunity to air their grievances and put an end to those intrusions into their parishes which he had evoked animosity. So basically, these cats are hating on this dude Grimshaw for preaching in their counties or in their parishes. He's like, this man can't preach in our parish, and blah, blah, blah. Bunch of haters. Drinking that haterade. In May 1748, only 6 months later, Grimshaw was called to account for himself at Wakefield Parish Church. Remembering full well that his friend Benjamin Ingham had been deprived of his regular ministry in similar circumstances, and at the same church, Grimshaw knew he faced the prospect of a comparable outcome. An extract from the interrogation had been preserved, and is one of the better known anecdotes told of the curate of Haworth. All right, here you go, y'all. So Hudson says, how many communicants had you at your quarterly sacraments when you first came to Haworth? Basically, how many church members you had? 12, my lord. Hudson, how many have you now at such solemnities? Grimshaw, in the winter, 400 to 500, and sometimes in the summer, near 1,200. Hutton, we cannot find fault with Mr. Grimshaw, as he is instrumental in bringing such numbers to the Lord's table. Very nice. Unable to find fault with Grimshaw on this front, his accusers, prominent among whom was his own vicar, Benjamin Kennett, laid a further charge, that of preaching in licensed meeting houses. Under the Toleration Act of 1689, dissenters were allowed freedom of worship, but all their meeting houses had to carry a license. Without such a license, they could claim no legal protection, but the early Methodists had not yet begun to license their places of worship at this time. Preferring the risk of mob violence to being labeled dissenters, so it was that the second charge could not be substantiated either, though Grimshaw undertook that he would take care never to preach in any building that carried a license. But Methodism had an implacable adversary in George White, the Vicar of Cologne. A courtesy title only for Cologne was a chaperly like Haworth, a town growing in importance both in size and industry with a population of 3,000. Cologne had become an attractive center for early Methodist preaching. Benjamin Ingham had evangelized there in 1743, and William Darnley had gathered together in a society in 1746. When William Grimshaw also began visiting the town that year, White's patience snapped. Not that he was a diligent parish priest himself, far from it. He was notorious for his absenteeism. Bama. On one occasion, he is said to have read through the burial service 20 times in one night over each of the dead bodies interred during one of his frequent absences. The dude was gone so long he missed 20 deaths. Dummy. A Durham boy who had trained for the Roman Catholic ministry in Douai, France. White had soon abandoned his earlier beliefs and had been accepted into the Anglican communion. Cone being his first appointment, a man of some literary ability, he had squandered his gifts by his addiction to drink and had already served a prison sentence for the debts this habit had incurred. It was a lead to his premature death 3 years after these events. Ain't that something? Huh? Good morning, good morning, good morning, everybody. Boom, boom. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Good to see everybody. Good to see everybody. Good morning, good morning. So it's good to see everybody checking in and stopping through. Appreciate it. So yeah, this Vicar, he was a pain in the butt, and it says, but he sounds like he was a drunk as well, and his drinking got him in jail because of his debts, and then also led to a premature death 3 years after these events. In 1748, this unworthy cleric determined to make another attempt to eliminate Methodism in his parish. His first stratagem was to deliver a sermon on July 24th denouncing these gospel preachers. Basing his harangue on 1 Corinthians 14:33, quote, "For God is not the author of confusion, but of peace." He tried to prove that such men as Grimshaw, Darnley, Benjamin Ingham were, quote, "schismatic rebels and authors of confusion and open destroyers of public peace." What an idiot. He touched on a theme like to incite his worldly minded hearers into action when he insinuated that by midweek preaching, these men were, quote, "causing a visible ruin to your trade and manufacture," end quote. Accusing Methodist preachers of being a weak, illiterate crowd, end quote. White inquired disdainfully, quote, "Is every bold visionary rustic to be a guide in matters of the highest importance?" What a jerk face. Following this inflammatory sermon, White called for an army of protesters, encouraging men to enlist in His Majesty's service under the command of the Reverend George White, Commander in Chief for the defense of the Church of England. Wow, these guys are losers. All white soldiers were to gather at the market cross at an appointed time where they would be suitably laced with alcohol to inflame their passions. Good. Let's go ahead and take some shots before we go mess with these gospel preachers. Each shall receive a pint of ale, advance, and other proper encouragements, promised the Vicar. He's like, "Yeah, man, I'm buying beer. Let's just go get these gospel preachers out of here. They're rattle rousing. Got to get rid of them." When John Wesley next visited Haworth in 1748, he came into a potentially explosive situation, but persecution was no new thing for this intrepid servant of Jesus Christ. He had left Newcastle August 7th together with Grace Murray, the widow to whom he was engaged, and William Mackford, an itinerant preacher. Arriving at Halifax on August 22nd, Wesley had attempted to preach in the center of the town, but was jostled, covered with dirt thrown at him by the mob, and eventually suffered a deep cut on the cheek from a sharp stone. Only then did he lead his hearers out to a meadow beyond the town, where he continued without interruption. Reaching Haworth on August 24th, after first preaching at Keighley on the way, he and his fellow travelers were no doubt grateful for the comforts of Grimshaw's hospitable home after the harassment they had suffered. Crowds soon began to gather as news of Wesley's arrival spread around, and he preached in the church at 5 that evening to more than the church could contain. So probably over 1,000. At 5 o'clock the following morning, he again addressed the people. Wow, 5 a.m. Thoreau was preaching. This early hour was chosen to enable his hearers to attend and also be at their places of employment on time. Good idea. After this morning service, Wesley and Grimshaw decided to visit roughly just 3 miles from Colne in order to encourage members of William Darney's society there. They knew well it would be a hazardous attempt, for 2 weeks earlier William Batty had again been mobbed near Colne, and the angry vicar had then declared, "I vow to God before they preach in my parish, I'll sacrifice ye last drop of blood to root them out." What a what a godly dude, you know? Just kidding. Hey Kim, good to see you. But despite this threat, they set out accompanied by Grace Murray and Mackford. They had not gone far before they were met by friends who urged them to proceed no further. They reported that an unruly and drunken rabble was approaching the village from the Colne direction, armed with clubs and any other menacing implements they could find. Even this did not deter Wesley. He knew the risk and was not intimidated. But he commented in his journal as he described that day's events, quote, "I was a little afraid for Mr. Grimshaw, but it needed not. He was ready to go to prison or death for Christ's sake." Nice. So instead, they all urged their horses onwards, planning to reach roughly ahead of the mob. Wesley proposed to exhort the people briefly, for he knew they would be expectantly waiting his arrival, and then set off back to Haworth. In this way, he hoped to avoid a riot and deprive the rabble of any opportunity to molest them. All seemed peaceful when they arrived at Roughly. There they were joined by Thomas Colbeck from Keighley and William Batty, who had made Roughly his home since May 1747. Then Wesley began addressing the gathered crowd, but before he had been speaking long, the agitated horde of protesters came swarming down the nearby hill and soon surrounded the company. Headed by the deputy constable, the rioters interrupted the service and insisted that Wesley accompany them to Barrowford, 2 miles distance, to appear before the constable of Barrowford. Wesley consented, but this did not deter one man from striking him across the face, while another hit him over the head with a stick, and a third brandished his club at him with menacing gestures. Grimshaw, Colbeck, and Batty followed Wesley, but before doing so, Grimshaw crossed over to Grace Murray, who would obviously be distressed, and said kindly, "Sister Murray, I will have you stay here. We will go and see the end." Miss Murray replied, quote, "I will do as you think proper." Quote. And for the next 2 or 3 hours, she and some of the believers in Roughly spent time in prayer. It's a good woman. That's his fiance. Wesley was conducted along the road to Barrowford, led all the way by a drummer beating on his drum in order to inflame the mood of the rabble yet more. At last they reached the White Bear Inn, where the local constable, James Hargrave, was waiting. In a letter of complaint written to Hargrave after these events, Wesley himself continues the story. So here's John Wesley. This is what he said about this. He said, "When your deputy had brought me into the house, he permitted Mr. Grimshaw, the minister of Haworth, Mr. Colbeck of Keighley, and one more, Batty, to be with me, promising that none should hurt them. Soon after, you and your friends came in and required me to promise I would come to Roughly no more. I told you I would sooner cut off my hand than make any such promise. Neither would I promise that none of my friends should come." So, man, I'm going to preach the gospel, no doubt. Like, whatever. So you can chop my hand off, I'm still going to preach the gospel. At this, the constable's men, no doubt also encouraged by George White, set upon him again, knocking him to the ground. When Wesley regained his feet, he tried to reason with antagonists for almost 2 hours, but it was little use. Quote, after abundance of rambling discourse, for I could keep none of you long to any one point, from about 1 o'clock to between 3 and 4, you seemed a little satisfied with my saying, quote, I will not preach at roughly at this time. You then undertook to quiet the mob. As Wesley, accompanied by the constable, left the inn by the front door, Grimshaw and Colbeck slipped out the back, but they were noticed. The mob immediately closed them in, tossed them to and fro with the utmost violence, threw Grimshaw down, and loaded them both with dirt and mire of every kind. Not one of your friends offering to call off your bloodhounds from the pursuit. Man, they're just getting manhandled by these cats. That's what's cool about America, and the right to bear arms. Somebody start looking like they're gonna hit me with a billy club. I pull my gun. I say, you might want to back up. Don't try to threaten me with your billy clubs and throwing dirt and rocks at me. But I guess they wasn't like that in 1740s. When Grimshaw, whose hefty physique was a match for most men, had shaken off his attackers, he saw a group of White's men kicking Colbeck as he lay on the ground. Tackling his way through the crowd to defend him, he shouted to the younger man, get out of the way, Tommy, with thy spindle shanks. Let them kick me. In the event, both men were sorely bedraggled by the fracas, and Grimshaw lost his wig. Oh, dang, bro was wearing a wig. Not content with manhandling the preachers, the angry rabble turned mercilessly on those who had been attending the meeting. William Maxford was severely mauled, while many others were beaten with clubs and dragged along the ground by the hair, regardless of whether they were men or women. Oh no, don't be touching the women now. As the people fled, the mob followed them. The road from Roughly to Barrowford runs parallel to a river flowing in a deep gully some 12 feet below the level of the road. In Barrowford, one man was forced to leap from a rock into the water far below, or he would have been tossed in headlong. When he dragged himself out, wet and bruised, it was with difficulty that bystanders prevented him from being flung in again. All this time, added Wesley to Hargrave, you sat well pleased close to the place, not attempting in the least to hinder them. At last the battered little party turned their horses back towards Haworth, although even as they rode along they could see threatening bands of men waiting for them on the hills. Quickening their pace, they managed to arrive back without further harm. Undaunted by his experiences, Grimshaw was at Wesley's side as the Methodist leader preached at nearby Heptonstall the following evening. But it was a striking contrast with the experiences of the previous day. Quote, the calmness of the evening agreed well with the seriousness of the people, every one of whom seemed to drink in the word of God as a thirsty land the refreshing showers. So that's cool. It's like even though they was getting their tails handed to them, beat up by this mob in Colne, Colne, they made it back and went and preached in Heptonstall, and everybody was really well receiving of the word. John Wesley subsequently wrote his letter of protest to Constable, a step he rarely took because the sufferings of his companions had grieved him. Quote, proceed against us by the law, he challenged. Quote, if you can or dare, but not by lawless violence, not by making a drunken, cursing, swearing, riotous mob, both judge, jury, and executioner. This is flat rebellion against God and the king, as you may possibly find to your cost. End quote. This was a veiled hint that he intended to take legal action against the callous men who had ill treated the people in this way. This he did, but little justice could be found for the despised Methodists, and the case eventually fizzled out, owing in part to the death of Wesley's principal legal advisor, William Glanville. Crap, his lawyer died. Before John Wesley left Haworth after the Roughly riots, Grimshaw consulted him over the education of his children. John was now 12 and Jane 11 years of age, and since the death of their stepmother 2 years earlier, they had been living at Ewood once more with their grandparents, John and Mary. Here's a footnote. It says, it was originally assumed that this letter was addressed to George White, but a reference in the MS diary of John Bennett, who was also present on the occasion, makes it clear that it was addressed to John James Hargrave, constable of Barrowwood. So, yo, man, y'all need to get your people right, get your stuff in order. He's like, I'm gonna get my lawyer to press charges on y'all punks, but then his lawyer died. Lockwood. Grimshaw himself spent as much time as he could at Ewood to be with them, but it was 12 miles from Haworth, and the arrangement was unsatisfactory. Apart from their education, their father would also have been concerned for the children's spiritual welfare. Jane gave every evidence of a heart tender towards God, but with John he had no such consolation. Perhaps the traits of character which were to cause Grimshaw much distress in later years were already becoming apparent, so he decided to send them to Wesley's Kingswood School in Bristol, as their names appear in the registers for 1748. In all probability, they traveled south with Wesley, arriving in Bristol in mid-September. Nice. With John Wesley gone and his children far away, William Grimshaw had one special consolation in September 1748, his first visit from George Whitefield. Much had happened in Haworth since Whitefield had sailed for America in August of 1744. Doubtless through his regular correspondence with the homeland and his friendship with both Ingham and the Countess of Huntingdon, Whitefield had heard of the revival that had broken out in West Yorkshire. When he arrived back in London, July 6, 1748, after 4 years' absence, he lost no time before he began an itinerary of areas of the country where he knew his spiritual children would be eagerly awaiting him. Writing to Benjamin Ingham 6 weeks after setting foot in England, he records his movements. Quote, in London, Bristol, Gloucester, and Wales, the glorious Emmanuel, since my arrival, has appeared to his people, end quote. He then informed Ingham of his proposed travels further afield. Quote, in about a fortnight, I propose leaving town again in order to go on a circuit of about 500 miles, end quote. He was not certain whether he would be able to see Ingham, but in the event, he called at Aberford on his way to Scotland. William Batty wrote in his journal, George Whitefield made a visit to B. Ingham. They were hearty together and spoke about accommodating matters with John Wesley. Pretty awesome. Pretty cool. Now, of Whitefield's biographers mention that he also visited William Grimshaw in that September in 1748 and preached in Haworth. Preached in Haworth, but Whitefield himself noticed the fact in an unpublished journal, probably the one from which John Gillis quotes extensively in his memoirs of the life of the Reverend George Whitefield. William Miles may also have had access to it when working on his biography of Grimshaw, for he records that Mr. Whitefield wrote in his journal. This is what he said. In September 1748, I visited Mr. Grimshaw at Haworth in the parish church where this venerable apostle constantly labored. I administered the Lord's Supper to upwards of 1,000 communicants and preached in the churchyard to 6,000 hearers. Awesome. 6,000 people showed up to hear George Whitefield. Gotta get 6,000 at Roseland, First Baptist Roseland, you know what I'm saying? Where the 6,000 at? Break them out. Let's study the scriptures together. In William Batty's account in his church history, there is a suggestion that he and Ingham may well have accompanied Whitefield from Aberford to Haworth. It is more than likely that these men would have discussed the recent riots in Roughly and Colne and the suffering that the believers in the area were enduring. Perhaps they had heard that George Whitefield planned to publish the vitriolic sermon he had preached against the Methodists in July, and were considering what their response should be. White published his sermon in November 1748, and Ingham wrote to Whitefield suggesting that he should come to the defense of the maligned Methodists and prepare an answer for the press. March 17th of 1749, Whitefield wrote to Grimshaw declining this invitation, in the first of only two letters from Whitefield to Grimshaw, which had been preserved. It says this journal may well be a continuation of the unpublished journal of Whitefield's journey home from New England via the Bermudas from March to July 1748. The journal is now apparently lost. See comments by Ian H. Murray in the preface to George Whitefield's journals. Fascinating. Whitfield went to the Bermudas. Bermuda, Bahama. Oh my gosh. Can't believe that's still in my brain somewhere. Whitfield to Grimshaw, which had been preserved. Its warm tone clearly indicates the friendship already established between them. This is what it says. It says, what a blessed thing it is that we can write when we cannot see each other. By this means, we increase our joys and lessen our sorrows, and as it were, exchange hearts. Thanks be to the Lord Jesus Christ that the work flourishes with you. I am glad your children grow fast. They become fathers soon. I wish some may not prove dwarfs at last. A word to the wise is sufficient. I have always found awakening times like spring times, many blossoms, but not always so much fruit. But go on, my dear man, and in the strength of the Lord you shall do valiantly. I long to be your way, but I suppose it will be 2 months first. Please tell dear Mr. Ingham that I cannot now answer the Preston letter, George White's sermon published in Preston, being engaged in answering a virulent pamphlet entitled The Enthusiasm of the Methodists and Papists Compared. Thus it must be, if we will be temple builders, we must have temple builders' lot. I mean, hold a sword in one hand and a trowel in the other. The Lord make us faithful Nehemiahs, for we have many Sanballats to deal with. But wherefore should we fear? If Christ be for us, who can be against us? My dear brother, good night. May the Lord Jesus be with your spirit and make you wise to win souls, even as wise as the angel of God. Excuse me. It's real good. Real good. Sorry about the cough. Real good writing. He's just like, man, we're encouraged. Even though we can't see each other, we can send these letters. We can encourage each other in grace. He's like, yeah, this one homeboy wrote this letter throwing shade at us. You want to respond to it? He's like, nah, I don't want to respond to it right now. But hey, just as Nehemiah's, let's got a trowel in one hand, a sword in the other. Let's keep building the temple of God, and God will protect us. God will do what he's needed to us. Grimshaw himself then determined to answer the delinquent cleric's attack on the Methodist preacher. Okay, so Grimshaw's about to say what's up to this cat. His aim was to dispel the widespread misunderstanding among the people about Methodism and to paint the contrast between the conscientious and self-sacrificing Methodist preachers and the irresponsible behavior of such churchmen as George White. The result was an octavo book of 98 pages, which he published later in 1749, ironically enough using the same printers as the Vicar of Cone, Stanley, and Moon of Preston. This treatise in defense of the Methodism was the only piece of Grimshaw's work to be published in his lifetime. Before the recovery of the manuscripts already mentioned, it had been assumed that this was the only thing Grimshaw had written. I would like to get my hands on that. As he was basically defending the Methodists and then also putting the Vicar of Cone out there, just saying, this dude is off his rocker. To think he's in cahoots with the scriptures and, promising people beer and shots, I'll promise you a bunch of alcohol if you come fight with me, these preachers and their followers. What a dingbat, What a dingbat. So Grimshaw wrote that 98 page you know, rebuttal. It says it's the only thing he published. So yeah, I would like to see that. William Miles, who published a biography of Grimshaw in 1806, devoted over half his book to a reprint of the work entitled An Answer to a Sermon lately published against the Methodists by the Reverend Mr. George White, M.A. Grimshaw assigned a third of it to delineating Methodist beliefs and practices that he might dispel any notion that he held unorthodox views, with constant references to the scriptures and to the articles and homilies of the Church of England. Excuse me. He set forth the main tenets of Methodist belief, which also formed a succinct summary of his own beliefs. Very nice. As he had been delivered after a long and painful search from the futile attempt to win the favor of God by his own morality, it is not surprising that Grimshaw should include statements which demonstrate the total corruption and bondage of man's will since the fall, and his inability to contribute in any way to his own salvation. Listen how he writes this. This is Grimshaw. What a dangerous mistake those people are under who believe and are taught as the modern language of but too many of our pulpits that conversion is nothing more than a turning from a bad to a good life. And if they do their best, striving to live as well as they can, the Lord will forgive their sins and save their souls. This notion or doctrine is utterly contrary to the Holy Bible, 39 articles, catechism, and liturgy of the Church of England and the principles of our dissenting brethren. Boom. He said it excellently, basically just saying, yo, it's not moralism. These poor people are being told by religious people or by basically false ministers, false preachers, that just turning from a bad life to a good life saves you. And do your best, striving to live as well as they can. And the Lord will forgive their sins because of that. That's retarded. That is absolutely horrible. Absolutely horrible. Absolutely horrible. It's like, no, man, it's abandoning your stock in your good and trusting the stock of Jesus. Referring to such teaching as, quote, this free will merit mongering heresy, Grimshaw states, I refuse not to declare it to be my own opinion that this doctrine of the devil has well nigh filled all the churches in the nation within these few years. God, who would not have the death of sinners, nor the kingdom and gospel of his dear Son to be totally abolished amongst us, raised up the Methodists on purpose to reclaim and preach up the same, to restore the church to her primitive purity and receive her homilies and articles out of the dust, and to purge her of that epidemical vice and wickedness which is everywhere observable where free will heresy prevaileth. Well said. Well said. All right, here's like the last page. Having set out the Methodist principles at length and touched on every aspect of the scriptural doctrines of salvation through the merits and death of the Son of God, Grimshaw then attacked the errant vicar of Cologne, both with sarcasm and scorn. These faithful Methodist preachers, he pointed out, had been caring for White's neglected flock night and day. Oh man, Grimshaw about to throw some haymakers without a penny from your purse while you boarded at Chester Castle. Basically, this dude, this White, this White Vicar White of Cologne, he would just be chilling at this Chester Castle for months on end, and not even caring for his people at all. In prison because of debts incurred. Oh, he was in prison because of debts incurred from excessive drinking. So you're a drunkard. You're in jail at Chester's Castle when you should be supposed to be taking care of your people. But you got these Methodist ministers doing the work of the ministry, not without a penny, not even taking a penny. He then pressed home his attack, deprecating the vicar's, quote, late riotous conduct, heading a lawless rabble of irreligious, dissolute wretches under the name and title of Commander-in-Chief, spiriting them up to the perpetration of many grievous outrages and inhumanely treating and abusing numbers of poor, inoffensive people. Grimshaw's answer was more than a match for the Vicar of Combe. Like Tyreman commented, quote, the one, White, was a braggadocio. The other, Grimshaw, was a giant, and with a giant's knotted club, he belabors the pompous priest with anything but the gentlest of a carpet knight. End quote. The work never became popular reading, but one of its lasting values is found in its description of Methodism. Methodism, so called by way of reproach, is a complete system of gospel truths and a perfect summary of Reformation principles. Notwithstanding the general opposition made to it on all sides, it daily gains ground. Its progress, considering how few years it is since its first appearance, is surprisingly extensive. It has all the marks and indications of a divine work. It ascribes the total of man's salvation to the mere free grace of God, the sole merits of Christ, and the operation of the Holy Ghost. It makes faith the instrument, Jesus' blood the cause, and the Spirit the discovery of our justification. It attributes our sanctification to this heavenly paraclete. It is everywhere spoken against. And here's your last paragraph. George White himself soon returned to his alcohol, dying in 1751 after another period of imprisonment for debt. But there is a tradition mentioned by John Newton that when he faced his last extremity and death seemed imminent, it was William Grimshaw that he sent for to come to his aid. Wow. Wow. Dang, I didn't see that coming. So George White, this Vicar, this dude who's like over the Church of England, like not the whole, but over a major region of the Church of England, it seems, who's leading these riotous mobs against our boy William Grimshaw and the Wesley brothers and George Whitfield and all these guys. You know, he had the demon of alcohol addiction, you know, stuck on that alcohol. It says George White himself soon returned to his alcohol, dying in 1751 after another period of imprisonment for debt. So I mean, he just ain't paying his tab. Homeboy, y'all know anybody like that? Just put it on my tab, put it on my tab, put it on my tab, put it on my tab. Just keep drinking, 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 never pays debt. Then boom, got to go to jail for it. But there is a tradition mentioned by John Newton that when the dude was about to die, William Grimshaw of Haworth, his biggest enemy on earth, when he's about to die, he said, bring William Grimshaw. He sent for William Grimshaw to come to his aid. And as we know, William Grimshaw from previous chapters, he would always go visit people on their deathbed. Man, you got to highlight that because that's crazy, you know, because, you know, you can have all these haters and we got to do our best to not take it personal, you know. We got to do our best to not take it personal. Obviously we got to strive every day to do the best we can in our faith and in our character and our attitude and our actions, right? Got to. However, even in doing that, if you do that, you know, you're going to have people, you're always going to have naysayers, and you're always going to have, sometimes you'll have violent people trying to take you out. But the violent person that caused Grimshaw the biggest pain, as far as persecution, the dude called for him on his deathbed. And I'm sure Grimshaw went. That's good. When the scripture says, you know, God wills that no man perish, you know, it's like in one sense, you know, God, you know, would hates that, you know, any would perish, you know, like it wasn't the, I don't, and I'm on that side of thinking it's like, oh man, like God wasn't, I'm gonna create all these people and a bunch of them are gonna go to hell, you know, it's like, you know, we had this like free will and stuff like that, and but with free will, choosing to disobey God. I watched Tim Webster this morning. Tim Webster every morning at 7 a.m., 7 a.m. Central, 8 a.m. Eastern time. He's good to check out. I check out. Definitely need to watch him. But some dude commented during the message of Tim saying, "Can man uh, refuse God?" And while Tim was preaching, I just commented, I was like, man refuses God every day. Man refuse. I mean, maybe he was talking from a soteriological point, salvation point, and maybe he's questioning what the Calvinists call irresistible grace. Like, okay, if you're talking about salvation, and in that side of Calvinism and Reformed theology, they say like, if God's going to save you, God's going to save you. It's irresistible grace. You cannot resist it. So maybe he was talking about that, but if he wasn't talking about that, other than that, people refuse God and reject God every day. That's what we talked about last night. Psalm 53. Um, man's depravity. Psalm 53, Psalm 14, Romans 1, Romans 3, 1 Corinthians 1, um, Genesis 6, 5 and 6, Isaiah 64, 6, the depravity of man. So in that sense, man, rejects God every day. But I guess if God's going to save you, God's going to save. I mean, God saved Paul kind of against his will. And if you read more of the Reformed writing, they say, well, God gently changes the will, something like that. I got no problem with the concept of God kicking the door down. If he wants to kick the door down and save somebody, I mean, how are we to say like, oh, that's not fair? Like the pot don't say to the pot maker, why you make me like this? Like, or why you do it like that? So I mean, God saved Abraham. I mean, basically against his will. His will was paganism. Abram was a pagan. Genesis 12. God spoke to him and changed him. So I mean, his will was something, and then his will changed. It's like, I'm gonna make a covenant with you. I'm gonna make you into a great nation. Those that bless you will be blessed. Those that curse you will be cursed. So it's interesting. It's interesting. So, all right, y'all. So that is chapter that was chapter 12. Chapter 13 is anecdotes from Haworth days. Anecdotes from Haworth days. I'm probably gonna take a little break. We on page 138. Anecdotes from Haworth days. See, I've been on for about an hour. So thanks for everybody tuning in, coming by. Check the YouTube page. YouTube page got all the sermons in a real nice order. Excuse me, that's free. The YouTube page would be First Baptist Roseland. First Baptist Roseland, and I got all the messages on there. So basically, I'm reading this book. Oh, and yeah, for those that just tuned in, Selina, Countess of Huntington. This is the other Faith Cook book by the Banner of Truth. So Faith Cook is an awesome author. YouTube, laptop, see that? Faith Cook, Selina, Countess of Huntington. This is a boss chick, For all you ladies that like a real, like I see an independent, godly woman, boom, read this joint. Written by a woman, about a woman. Amazing book. And then this is what we have been going through right here. You have a great day too, Miss Peggy. Good to see you. William Grimshaw of Haworth. That's the other book she wrote. So Faith Cook seems like an awesome lady. I think she's still alive. She's probably up in years out there in England. Shout out to Miss Faith Cook. Shout out to Banner of Truth. All the books I read, banneroftruth.org. You can order them on there. Please do. Please go to banneroftruth.org and order some of these books and read them. They're really encouraging. But yeah, let's see what time we got. It's 11:18. So yeah, I just did that chapter. What up, J.R. Switz? What up? Good morning. What up, Amanda? What up, J.R.? What up, Jesse? Good to see y'all. Good to see you. Yeah, I've just been reading, like I said, finishing up William Grimshaw's biography. Okay, the joint is good. 1740s. We just read his chapter. He got his butt kicked. There's like persecution. People were making these riots. They throw dirt at him, throw rocks at him. I was at the Wesley Brothers. I was at all of them. George Whitfield. Good morning. Good morning. Yeah, man. These cats, they were getting that persecution in that last chapter. They would try to they'd hit him with clubs, hit him with billy clubs, hit him with sticks, hit him with rocks. They just hating the Methodist preachers bad, man. Hating the Methodist preachers bad in 1749, 1748, 1747. But the main dude that was causing the problems, he died in 51. He was a vicar. He was kind of like over a region of the Church of England, and this dude, he was an alcoholic, so he'd be drinking and he'd be like running up his tab, he'd be like, oh, put on my tab, put on my tab, put on it. Before you know it, his bill's forever. He can't pay it, and they throw him in jail. So this guy, he's supposed to be a religious, godly man who's, I guess, just getting body blows by alcoholism and beat up, and so and then you have to go to jail, and he's missing out on his parishioners. Parishioners are passing, dying. One of his trips while he's in jail, come back, 18 people are dead, and he didn't get to do any of their funerals, which is weird, So, but then when he's on his deathbed in 1751, guess who he asked for? William Grimshaw, the same dude. He was throwing shade and creating these ruckus, little riotous mobs to beat up Grimshaw and his listeners and the Wesley brothers, John and Charles Wesley. On his deathbed, he's like, please bring Grimshaw. And as we understand, Grimshaw went and spoke with him on his deathbed. Hopefully the dude made peace with God, after all those years of throwing shade and not just shade, but even throwing rocks and sticks. Sticks and stones may break my bones. Didn't say that none of them got their bones broke, but one cat got thrown off. It says there was this creek down there about 10 feet or 15 feet off this ledge. They would throw these ministers and throw these people over this cliff into that creek, and dare them to get out. They'll throw them in again. So there's just some haters, man. There's a whole bunch of haters on the Methodists. It's like the Methodist preachers from 1749, 1750. So, all right, cool. Well, I'm gonna go eat lunch. It's 12 o'clock here in it's 11:22 here in Louisiana. I'm about to go get me some tuna fish, low sodium tuna fish. Put some apple cider vinegar in there, a little Old Bay seasoning. Store it up. Good. Maybe a couple jalapeno slices for the glory of God. For the glory of God. So, good to see y'all. Thanks for tuning in. I'll be on later. God bless you guys. We'll pray. Dear Jesus, thank you for this day. Bless all the hearers. Bless everyone that checked in. Bless their family members. And Lord, we just pray that you would make our nation physically healthy and spiritually healthy, relationally healthy, rationally healthy, volitionally healthy for your name's sake and your glory. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, y'all. Peace. All right, church page. See you, FBC Rosa.
Good morning, good morning, good morning.
Put that.
Good morning.
All right, YouTube.
Well,
thanks for checking in, bud.
10:19 Central Time, 11:19 East Coast.